they're going to try to make a major move, what they're calling the global reset or the great reset, where they say we're going to just reset the financial system. And I think the implications are going to be very profound. I think one of the things that they're looking at is phasing out the US dollar as a global reserve currency.
Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And today I sure am darn quite excited to have my good friend Alex Newman, who's really, you're like a Batman freedom superhero climbing from Davos to Bilderberg meetings to find out what's going on, spread the truth on some of the ridiculous whoppers that the elite planners are up to. That is Alex Newman, foreign correspondent of the New American. Alex, great to have you back on the show. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. It's great to be with you. Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, and darn fascinating times on the planet. Uh, so many things to cover, although I wonder how many people have seen that the theme for this is actually 2021 Davos, the Great Reset. I had thought it was this past year's or this 2020 theme, but Alex, correct me. I believe this is the upcoming plan. And any thoughts on that? The World Economic Forum has the Great Reset as their topic.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And this is hugely significant. It's funny that you asked me about it today because I'm just now starting an in-depth investigation of this. I'm hoping to have at least my preliminary findings published at thenewamerican.com by early next week. But this is huge, Chris. It's orchestrated. I think in the context of the coronavirus hysteria, the market implosion related to that, then the riots, all these crises, all this psychological warfare going on at once. They're going to try to make a major move, what they're calling the global reset or the great reset, where they say we're going to just reset the financial system. And I think the implications are going to be very profound. I think one of the things that they're looking at is phasing out the US dollar as a global reserve currency. But even more importantly than that, they want to rebuild the global economy on an entirely new foundation, get away from the nation state, what remains of the free market system, and move it more toward a globalistic, a technocratic type system, obviously under the guise of benefiting humanity. But I think it's very possible we'll see things like universal basic income thrown out, mass dependency, huge changes I think are going to be coming, Chris.
Yeah, and I thought just so that we don't have to assume, people might like to see for themselves. So we'll watch the overview. Everybody grab some popcorn, join in for what the New World Order has planned. So here we go. Certainly some nice uplifting imagery they're mixing into this one. All right, Alex, certainly a pleasant, uplifting video from the Davos folks. And here we have that slide saying our systems need a reset. So you have a very unique perspective. You study these things like Bilderbergers, where these elites go and the things they get into, how a lot of these things are often foreshadowed and forecasted. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think this is hugely significant. And, the World Economic Forum is an incredibly powerful organization. It's one of the globalists, kind of the deep state's open organizations, one of their public faces where people, it's reported on in the news, not like Bilderberg, where you don't hear a word about it in the press. So what they're doing here is very significant. I think they've got very, very ambitious plans. And even just from watching the video, you kind of get a sense of where they're going, right? Humans bad, capitalism bad, is producing all this garbage and, unemployment and riots. And won't it just be so wonderful when we all move toward this new reset system that we intend to build for you? And it's partly a marketing ploy, right? No totalitarian ever marketed totalitarianism by saying, hey guys, it's going to be like a boot slamming on your face for all of your life, right? You're going to be a slave. Isn't that exciting? No, it's, oh, everything's going to be great. It'll be unicorns and rainbows and free money for everybody. So that's, I think, the angle they're going for, Chris. But we need to be very weary of this. I mean, these people have an agenda. They have a lot of power. And they've pretty much told us what their agenda is. They want a lot less people on the planet. They want a lot more money and power for themselves, a lot less for us. So I think we need to be very weary of this. And like I said, I'll be doing a very deep investigation into this. And hopefully my preliminary findings will be published by early next week at thenewamerican.com.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to that one because I have so many questions about it. But to pick a good one for now, are you hearing anything specifically in terms of the finances where, I don't know, I'm of the school of thought that a lot of these things are probably planned pretty far in advance, whether it's the stock market crash. We had your friend, G. Edward Griffin. What a darn cool guy, by the way. And he talked about the history of these, the Battle of Waterloo, or crash the market with false information, buy stuff up. So I do think it's at least conceivable that some of these events, I mean, you told me that they're orchestrating the reset now. I wouldn't be surprised. Curious, anything along those lines that you're hearing or can point to?
Well, I agree with G. Edward Griffin. These things are orchestrated far in advance. And I think we've seen a lot of curious developments, even with this whole coronavirus thing, which supposedly necessitates the Great Reset, right? In 2010, you had the Rockefeller Foundation put out a report, a very bland title. It was something like, the future of technology and innovation, or something boring like that. In 2010, and they had 4 scenarios for how they were going to advance their New World Order agenda. And one of them was called lockstep. And I mean, if you read this report, if you read what was going to play out during this hypothetical pandemic, it's like reading the news today, right? The communist Chinese totalitarian system works so great because everybody just listens and nobody asks questions. Whereas those dumb Americans, because they have this free system, they had all these problems. But by the end of this, we're all supposed to be begging for biometric IDs, for more controls on the economy, for, all kinds of new intrusive technologies that'll surveil and track us everywhere. And then, speaking of the World Economic Forum, that just in October of 2019, they had a hypothetical exercise. It was sponsored by World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And the scenario was a hypothetical novel 2019 coronavirus. Interesting, that would magically appear and would kill a lot of people and would necessitate all these incredibly Orwellian policy responses, including, mind you, censorship of social media. Oh, here on the screen, I think you see their statement about it. Like, yeah, it was really close to what we imagined, but it had nothing to do with it, right? So there you go. And, I think these are things that we all ought to at least be asking questions about. Are these guys just super geniuses and they just have so much foresight that they knew to think about these things in advance, or is something else going on here? I think we really ought to be asking some serious questions, especially when they're talking about this global great reset that is going to transform the economy, transform governance, transform every element of our lives. We really need to be asking these questions, Chris.
I couldn't agree more. Again, I don't claim to have any answers here, but it just did seem odd that of all the things to do on a Saturday afternoon in New York, last October, they were studying this, and lot of unusual things happening. Certainly seems, I think certainly people who follow the financial side feels if a lot of them, not everybody, but to me, it feels like something is coming to a head. You see a lot of, obviously the Corona stuff is happening. You and I talked about a month or two ago with Corona, how we heard the phrase second wave being introduced a lot. And any thoughts on what may be happening there as that term becomes more common now?
Yeah, and I've seen this coming from a mile away, and just today we were talking before we started in the news. Now Florida and Texas are shutting the bars down. It looks like lockdown number 2 is coming very quickly. Apparently, Beijing is already under some sort of serious lockdown. The European Union is looking at the United States. I think part of it is just manipulation. If you look, they've drastically increased testing, and they're finding more new cases. Like, oh wow, surprise! Who would have ever figured that if you tested twice as many people, you'd find twice as many new cases? That's a mystery. But I think the implications for the market are going to be huge, Chris. They kept talking about this V-shaped recovery, that as soon as we got out of the coronavirus stuff, everything was just going to bounce back, and all those 50 million jobs that we lost were just going to magically reappear, and small business was going to magically reopen its doors after 3 months, and everything was going to be great again. I am not convinced, and it looks very much like this second lockdown is actually just a prelude to the third lockdown and the fourth lockdown. It looks like they're going to keep doing this to us as long as they can, and until they've completely eviscerated the middle class, and then they'll dangle some light at the end of the tunnel for us. Oh, once Bill Gates' vaccine is ready, then we can go back to normal. After all your small businesses are bankrupt, after you've all lost your jobs, after you're all dependent on the bankrupt federal government, and after the dollar is worthless, then we'll go back to normal. So, the implications of this for the market are going to be absolutely huge, Chris. And people better be positioning themselves right now, because big changes are coming in the markets, in government, in business, in everything that we can think of, and it all ties right into this global reset that they're pushing.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, should that continue, how the markets react. Especially, I have my love affair with, well, not in love with silver, but quite intrigued by studying and following this market. And when you had Corona first, the reports of it flare up, there was a big surge in demand for precious metals. I'm curious if there is a second wave, not hoping for that by any means, but just from the standpoint of being prepared as best as possible, should that happen, I'm wondering, well, what would happen this time? And Alex, I'm going to also pull up a chart here. I'd love to get your take on this, because I believe we've known each other long enough. I must have talked about the Department of Justice's investigation into the silver market at some point, where they've had several guilty confessions from traders from JP Morgan and others, saying that they were doing what's called spoofing, and it was widespread practice at the firm, smashes the price or can move it in either direction, and basically you can game these things. And I'll tell you what, if I had known that the price here was going to drop from 1750 to 1730 and rally back up to 1770, you tell me that in advance, I could take a very small amount of money and make a massive amount of money trading that. So it's kind of like what the Department of Justice is getting guilty confessions of. Here, I thought this was special because you get it actually 3 days in a row, right at 8 o'clock. The hammer gets dropped on no news that I've been able to find, and then each day rallies right back up. So any thoughts on what we're seeing here in silver in the face of a federal investigation?
Yeah, I think the silver and gold markets are so rigged. They're so thoroughly manipulated. Unfortunately, it's not just silver and gold anymore. And I wrote an article about this, Chris, back in 2010. I encourage people to go read it, because I interviewed some top experts on this manipulation in the precious metals, in the stock market, in the real estate market, even in the currency markets. It is incredible what's going on here. We know that a lot of very influential people are involved in this. I mean, heck, George Soros was convicted of insider trading in a French court, right? And we know that George Soros got his start. Actually, his quantum fund was funded originally out in Switzerland by the Rothschild dynasty. So there's some very important players that are involved behind the scenes in the market, who have access to this kind of information, who drive these kinds of moves. And the manipulation in the gold and silver markets, I think at this point, if it was a snake, it would have bit you, right? It's just so obvious. It's so blatant and in your face. And there's a lot of people making a lot of money off of this. As you mentioned, the DOJ knows some of this. We've had traders come out and blow the whistle on some of this, and it's not new. Again, I reported this in 2010 in a very in-depth investigative piece. And it works out very nicely for the people who have the information beforehand, or for the people who are involved in moving these prices. Frankly, I think the price of silver ought to be way above where it is. And were it not for all this blatant manipulation, I think gold and silver would both be drastically higher than they are right now. And I do expect them to move higher eventually. I don't expect that they'll be able to suppress the prices or manipulate them in this way indefinitely. But it does play a very nice role in kind of concealing the monetary inflation that we're seeing on a huge scale right now, right? The Federal Reserve literally printing trillions of dollars, buying up all kinds of assets, including things that they normally don't buy. And naturally that would push the price of gold and silver up. But as long as they can keep that artificially depressed, it doesn't look as bad as the situation really is. Eventually, that all is going to blow up in smoke. But in the meantime, a lot of people are going to make a lot of money.
Yeah, I agree that what you just ended all of it, but especially that it's going to blow up in smoke. I don't know that we're at that point yet, although what I find interesting, people have heard a lot about a break in the gold market on March 23rd and 24th. Those were the days, 23rd, when Fed announced upgraded the QE to unlimited. It's like, I'll supersize it. Yeah, give me the drink too. Although in New York, you would have to obviously get two 16-ounce sodas rather than a 32-ouncer, since legislation there keeps us safe. But this is very similar to what it looks like on the chart of gold those 2 days. And I would say I've never quite seen this in the decade plus now that I've been studying the silver market. So it's kind of hard to say, but when you at least that if something were happening beneath the surface, then you could imagine that might be what it looks like. Alex, last one for you before we wrap up. It's interesting. There's been so much going on in the world. Normally at this time of the year in this cycle, all we would be hearing about is how this politician wants, to keep the poor man down, and this guy wants to do this to elephants. And it's almost incredible how we're a couple of months away from the election, and it's actually kind of nice getting a break from all the propaganda. But curious, what do you see happening on this one? I mean, based on what we've seen so far this year, I cannot even imagine what is planned. So what do you see happening there?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very volatile next few months, Chris, not just in the markets, but out on the streets. I mean, we're seeing a lot of unrest and protests and riots and looting. I think we're going to see a lot more of that, combined with a lot of psychological warfare. I think that's really the only way to describe what we're seeing. It's just constant hammering of the American people. And I think, frankly, a lot of them know that it's lies, it's propaganda, but it still has the intended effect of demoralizing people, of neutralizing opposition, of getting people to just, throw their hands up and, okay, I give up. I can't take it anymore. What do you want from me? And I'll give it to you. So I think we're going to see a whole lot more of that going into this election. And I think this election is, very well might end in chaos and confusion. There's already talk of massive voter fraud. I wouldn't doubt it a bit. It looks like the Democrats are preparing already for huge fraud levels. And it's going to be a very volatile next few months. And I think regardless of what happens in the election, whether Trump wins or Biden wins, or it's unclear who wins, there is going to be some very, very significant unrest in the United States. And I mean, the federal government has gotten so big and so bloated that, now it really matters a lot who's in control of it. It has the power to destroy people, destroy industries, destroy businesses on a whim, right? I mean, you have Biden saying he's going to force us all to wear a mask with an executive order. I mean, it's a very significant election when we're at the point where the president thinks he can tell everybody what they have to wear on their face or not. So it's going to get really heated, Chris, and I hope people are psychologically prepared for turbulent times. I hope they're financially prepared for turbulent times. I hope they're spiritually prepared for turbulent times. And I think if you don't have a little bit of extra food and some metals of various types, including lead, in large supplies at your house, now might be the time to consider topping up. So.
Yeah, well, we'll hope for the best on that one. I mean, certainly, maybe it's got to be some good surprise coming one of these days. Well, one quick last one for you. Do you think that it is already decided who is our next president?
No, I think a lot of things could change. I do think it's still up in the air. I think the polls are very fake. The polls, it's again part of the psychological warfare. They want us to think that Biden's already won the election, and they tried the same thing in 2016. I think they were counting on massive levels of vote fraud delivering the election to Hillary Clinton. And I think the the massive tsunami of support for President Trump, it overwhelmed their voter fraud. So I think 2020 is still up in the air. I think it could go either way. I don't think it's already decided. I think the powers that be would like to believe that it's already decided, but I think a lot of things can change, and I think a lot is now out of their control. I think if the 2016 election showed us anything, it's that the establishment is losing control of the narrative. Right, out of the top 100 newspapers in this country, 2 of them endorsed Trump. They did a study on the network coverage of the presidential campaigns. 92% of the coverage of Trump was negative to very negative, and still Trump won the election by very significant margins. Took huge numbers of delegates beyond what he needed to win. So, I think the establishment has lost control of the narrative to a large extent, and I think it's going to be a very volatile election year. I don't think it's decided yet, but I do think that the powers that be have a plan. Whether they'll succeed remains to be seen.
Well, gee, you'd think if there's anything that could finally spark the silver market, overwhelm the paper demand, I mean, I'm a former option trader, and I wonder what volatility level we would price in on the U.S. election. Alex, I sure appreciate all the information you shared, all that you do. Here is the New American that is a part of, and in the description link below, you can sign up if you'd like to get Alex's columns and be as soon as Alex sends out his piece on Davos, which I am looking forward to. And Alex, anything else you could share that folks should know?
No, just thank you very much for having me, Chris. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for what you do, providing insight in the markets. It's just very, very important. If people want to get, I think the most important magazine in the United States in terms of useful, accurate intelligence, subscribe to the New American. Fantastic publication. You'll get, no celebrity gossip or anything like that, but a lot on the economy, the political system, what's going on behind the scenes. My upcoming one will be what's really behind the riots will be the cover story. So I hope people will look for that. And thanks again for having me, Chris. Always such a pleasure.
Well, I sure appreciate that. And folks at home, if you really enjoyed what Alex shared today, well, there was a friend of Alex's who was on the show the other night, our man G. Edward Griffin, who was a lot of fun to talk to. And stay tuned because it is coming your way now.